Hey guys, welcome to my channel Miss Recap. The movie begins in a space museum, and we are introduced to Commander Elio Solis, while under the table is her nephew Elio, and we hear that he is sad due to the death of his parents. So Olga makes the decision that she would leave the space program because she has to focus on taking care of her nephew. But suddenly we see that Elio had disappeared, and that he is still sad because he missed his parents. He then enters an exhibit that is closed, and we see that he is attracted by the reflection of a machine. Elio presses a button to turn on the device, and a recording begins that narrates the origin of time, where they begin to say that they are not alone in the universe and that they are on a space mission to find alien life, where the only problem is that it is a lonely mission, but it is totally worth it to prove that they are not alone. While in space, the ship is on its way to start with its mission, but ends up being attracted by some kind of light. We go to Earth, and we see that Elio likes to draw alien messages in the sand because he wants to be abducted by a spaceship. Then we realize that he doesn't like to socialize with people his own age because he is only interested in meeting alien life. But suddenly we see that one day he fell asleep on the beach because he was too tired and ended up being woken up by an unknown person. Bryce starts telling him that he found one of his posters about the ham radio club and that he has his own signal to communicate with his friends. Elio starts to tell him that they can use his radio to increase the range and that he can leave now because the meeting is over. But suddenly we see that Caleb had arrived, and Bryce tells his friend that they should not bother the boy because his parents had died. Then they realize that the radio is playing, and they begin to fight to hear the message, which ends up causing Elio to be hit, and he starts attacking him to get revenge for what he did. But suddenly we see that the police have arrived and that they have called their guardians to come and get them. Olga tells her nephew not to touch his eye for 2 weeks and also decides to scold him for missing school. We then realize that Olga turns down opportunities because of her nephew, because she feels responsible for the trouble he causes. Elio manages to hear that there is an emergency meeting because Melmac thinks that they had found aliens. He starts to say that he found an unknown signal coming from interstellar space and that it was some kind of answer to the message they sent, but the commander thinks that he is just hallucinating and gives him a vacation so he could rest. Then Elio takes the opportunity to infiltrate the room because he plans to use the microphone to answer the message. But suddenly we see that the message had caused a power failure, and Olga realizes that it was caused by her nephew. Elio is excited that he is going to be picked up by an alien species, but his aunt scolds him for the trouble he caused because he almost got her fired from her job. Elio begins to argue that no one loves him, and he yells at his aunt that he doesn't consider her his family. He then realizes that his aunt is sad about the words he said and that she plans to take him to some sort of camp, so he leaves his room to look at the stars and starts listening to a program about alien sightings. In the next morning, the family is on their way to get to the camp, and Elio is sad because he doesn't want to stay. Olga starts to tell him that she also came to the camp when she was a child and that he should not be sad because it is a nice experience. But suddenly we see that there are also the kids that he met on the beach and that they want to take revenge for getting him in trouble. Then Elio prepares to send alien signals, and we see that outside his tent the kids put on masks to try to scare him. But when they arrive, they realize that Elio had escaped and that he ran off into the woods because he was scared, while Olga is sending coordinates to move a satellite, and we see that she is writing to her nephew because he had not answered her. Suddenly she realizes that there is an unknown signal and that they sent a message with a kind of drawing, so she realizes that she had made a mistake because the signal was an alien message. Elio kept running to escape from the kids, but ends up being caught too easily. He then realizes that there is a light on the shore and that everything around him has stopped in time because he is being searched by an alien ship, and we see that he gets happy that they started to abduct him. Elio begins to be thankful that they fulfilled his dream and ends up being greeted by some kind of alien. He then puts a device on him so he can communicate and says it is a computer that can control his gravity. The alien takes Elio to meet the Communiverse and says that it is a galactic organization of the most advanced species. Then the ambassadors arrive to welcome him because Elio had been selected as Earth's candidate. Helix begins to say that they are looking for new species to join their community, and we see that Elio is excited that he would finally be accepted. The ambassadors take Elio to meet the members who are part of the community and say that each member has invented something different. They then use nanotechnology to give him new clothes, and Elio tells tells the ambassadors that he always had a dream of being abducted by aliens, to which they reply that they had been looking for him for years because they found the ship that was repeating his message. Elio realizes that they are making a mistake because they think that he had created the ship and that he sent a signal as the leader of the Earth. Later, we realize that they have another candidate, but they reject Lord Grigon because he is in search of power. So he makes the decision that he would conquer the community with the help of his army, which ends up causing them to want to escape, and they won't accept Elio because they closed the applications. Elio begins to think that he would be returned to Earth, and we see that for that reason, he decides to continue with the lie that he is the leader of his planet, because that way, he could convince the aliens to stop their invasion, and thus get accepted as a member of their community. Later, we see that the alien takes a DNA sample from him to create a replacement, so that they won't be suspicious of his absence on Earth. Elio is surprised that he is a perfect copy, and we see that he is sent to the time of his abduction. He then asks the manual on how to negotiate with criminals, because he wants to improve his persuasion skills. While on Earth, Olga is angry about what was done to her nephew, and starts apologizing for leaving him at the camp. She then realizes that Elio is acting strangely, because he is no longer interested in the subject of the aliens. We return to space, and we see that the ambassadors are freaking out about the Emperor's invasion. Elio begins to prepare to start negotiating, and is sent in a ship to meet with the invaders. He then uses the device to be able to breathe on the ship, and they begin to take him to meet with their leader. But when he arrives, he realizes that it is too scary, because they use weapons as a method of negotiation. Grigon begins to say that he wants to be part of the community, but had been rejected because they consider him a monster. So Elio decides that he has to persuade him, and begins to tell him that he'd better find a place where he will be accepted. But suddenly we see that he begins to speak badly about the Emperor's son, because he is making fun of his methods of raising him. Grigon makes the decision that he would end the negotiation, and that they would take Elio as their new prisoner. While on Earth, Olga is surprised by the change in her nephew. Elio begins to shout that they are making a mistake, and says that because of him, they are going to destroy the community. He then realizes that he can escape through the window, and modifies gravity to get out of his room. Elio is on his way through the conduits of the ship, and we see that by accident, he had fallen down a hole, where we can see that there is a kind of monster, and that he uses the translator disc to communicate. Then he introduces himself as Glorden, and says that he had wrapped him up so he wouldn't be afraid. Elio realizes that the invaders are actually some kind of worms, and that they use armor to look more terrifying. But suddenly we see that the alarm had been activated, because they realize that the prisoner escaped. So Elio decides that he would confess the truth, and says that he only told lies to be accepted in the community. Then Glorden confesses to him that he is the son of the Emperor, and we see that Elio decides that he would ask him to be his bargaining chip, because he can be used to stop the invasion, and he says that this way he would finally get the attention he has always wanted from his father. But suddenly we see that Elio is called from one of the ambassadors, and they say that they are afraid of the Conqueror's weapons. They then continue on their way to escape through the tunnels, and we see that Elio decides to enter his friend to protect himself from the lava, because his species likes high temperatures, and they manage to reach the place where their ship was. Then they are on their way to reach the communiverse, and Elio tells the Emperor that he had captured his son to stop the invasion. Glorden begins to pretend that he is being tortured, and they manage to convince him to stop his attack. The ambassadors are excited that he accomplished his mission, and say he will be named as a member of the community. While on the alien ship, the Emperor is thinking that they had kidnapped his son because he was vulnerable, and says they would give him his armor to have his ceremony. We go to the communiverse, and see Elio having fun with the new friend he made. Then Glorden tells him that his mother is absent because she fights in the wars, and that at times he thinks his father has no feelings for him, to which Elio tells him that he knows how he feels, and that during his journey, he discovered that maybe nobody loves him because of the way he behaves. But suddenly we see that the army has arrived, and Glorden confesses to Elio that he doesn't want to be part of the wars, because he doesn't really like to do harm, and he doesn't agree with the invasions of his species. So Elio decides that he has to help his friend, and that he would think of an idea to keep him out of his armor. They then go on their way to create a new replacement, because no one would notice that they had been swapped. But suddenly, we see Elio become saddened by his aunt's behavior, because his replacement is being treated better. They then use the machine to make a clone of Glorden, because they plan to use it to trick his father. While on Earth, Olga had realized that she is being tricked, and decides to remove a hair to do a DNA test, with which she manages to discover that her nephew was acting differently because he was a clone. We return to space, and we see that Elio meets with the Emperor to give him his son. Grigon begins to say that the time had come for him to become a warrior, and that he would put on the armor to be part of his army. Then the Emperor thanks him for keeping his word and says that they would return to their ship to leave the community. But suddenly we see that they end up being discovered because a father can never be fooled. Questa uses her powers to look inside his memories and manages to discover the truth of each of his lies. Glorden realizes that they had been discovered, and we see that he had accidentally turned on the ship to leave on his way to Earth. The ambassadors decide that they would use one of the portals to get him back to Earth because they were only fooled by a child. But suddenly we see that the Emperor is back, and he says that he would control the communiverse because he did not find his son. Questa decides to sacrifice himself so that he could escape, and we see that he throws him into the portal to return to his planet. So Elio realizes that he had made a mistake and says that again he had been abandoned. While in the distance, his aunt is walking along with his replacement, and we see that he takes the opportunity to reunite with her. Olga begins to say that she is going crazy because she wants to communicate with the alien species to get her nephew back. Then Elio realizes that he was always wrong because his aunt had always treated him as her family. But suddenly we see that his replacement had returned, and he tells them that a ship had fallen on the base. Elio starts to tell them that it was his ship and that they must get there in time to save his friend. Then they come up with the idea that they can use the replacement to distract the soldiers and take the opportunity to infiltrate the base. They then decide to disguise themselves so as not to be recognized, and Elio uses his hand to get the door open. Elio realizes that his friend is in trouble because the device is failing and says that they must help him because he is very cold. But suddenly we see that they had been discovered and that they speak a secret language so that they don't discover their plan. Then Elio takes the opportunity to turn on his ship, and they leave at high speed on their way to space. Olga realizes that they can't go any faster because there is a rain of garbage and says she needs the coordinates to have a safe way. Elio comes up with the idea that he can use a signal to communicate with Bryce and says he knows a person who would help them with the problem. Melmac starts telling them that he would use the network to send the coordinates, and they manage to dodge the garbage with their teamwork. Suddenly we see that they had lost the signal and they start getting hit by the rain of garbage. Then they realize that they are receiving the signal from different parts of the world and begin to help them so they can be saved. Olga uses the ship to activate the hyperspeed, and they manage to get there in time to save their friend. The Emperor realizes that they had brought his son, and we see that he makes the decision that he would get out of his armor in order to save him from the cold. Glorden begins to apologize for the trouble he caused and says he doesn't want to become a war machine, to which his father tells him that he already knew the truth and that it doesn't matter what he decides because he would always be proud. Then the Emperor says that they would end the invasion, and we see that the ambassadors decide to name Elio as part of the communiverse because he proved that he is an honorable person because he decided to sacrifice himself to save his friend. But suddenly we see that Olga is sad because she would miss her nephew, and Elio makes the decision that he would refuse the medal to return to his aunt because during his trip he learned important lessons and that he would like to return to make things better. The ambassadors say they understand his decision, and we see them say goodbye to return home. We go to Earth and we see that humans are finally able to discover that there is life on other planets. The movie ends here. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notification so you can watch more videos like this.